I know this for a fact. When shit generally hits the fan, if you're not super well integrated to that community to the point where you guys are symbiotic, listen, tribalism kicks in like this.
Real quick.
Tribalism kicks in like this.
Real quick.
Along family lines, along racial lines, along ethnic lines, along nationality lines. Who's a refugee, who's not. Even the way that they talk about these refugees, they're like, well, these refugees are different. They look like us, they sound like us, so we can accept them. Like, the news coverage has been creepy like that.
Yeah.
So
if this shit happens in Quebec, you think the English people are not gonna go back of the bus?
Yeah.
This is Quebecer town right here.
yeah, I already...
Salutations and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kadology and I make videos about everything and anything to do with modern society. So today we're going to talk about something a bit more personal, because I know some of you like my more personal, chatty, story time genre of video. And it's also something that relaxes me and is quite therapeutic, so I thought, why not? Especially as I have just gotten soaked by the rain outside and I need something to warm and cheer me up. So none of this is scripted, so do bear with me, but I thought it would be quite interesting to talk about tribalism and about tribes in general, because I think when I moved to the United Kingdom from my original native country, South Africa, I was under the illusion that I would leave tribalism behind, that I was moving into a progressive, multicultural and also individual-minded context and part of the world where what I had grown up with would no longer sort of define who I was. And boy, was I wrong. So for a bit of historical context, especially for those of you who don't know, I am originally from South Africa. I was born in South Africa and I lived there until I was 16 years old, at which time I was given a day's notice and informed that I was moving to the United Kingdom to live with a new guardian. And a consequence of that was that I had to very hastily and suddenly and without warning leave the boarding school that I had been living at for the past 2 and a bit years, and I came to the UK with no plan. I hadn't been accepted into any school. I was out of school for months when I got here. No school would accept me, and yes. And I think what was most weird about it is that, at least at first, when I moved to the UK, I realized that I wasn't homesick. What I was sick for was my boarding school. The social worker who was taking care of me, in a sense, would ask me what was wrong, why I refused to, for instance, get new clothes, why I refused to unpack everything that I had bought in my case. Well, for me at least, it was because I wanted to go back to my boarding school. And I think the reason why I wasn't homesick is because of my experience with my tribe. I'm not necessarily sure about South Africa right now, as I have regrettably never gone home since moving to the UK. I haven't left the UK at all, but at least when I was growing up in South Africa, tribes were significant and were very, very important, particularly where I lived, in which I basically lived in the home province of my tribe. I am a member of the Zulu, or the isiZulu tribe, the largest tribe in Southern Africa, a tribe which came to power in the 1800s behind the incredibly destructive but also great and magnificent battle and strategic and ethnographic changes made by King Shaka Zulu. My relationship with the Zulus is a very bitter one, at least from my end. It is one that I don't, at least now, blame the Zulu nation for, because I am coming to terms with and do understand the significance of tribalism and what it means to people and how it gives people meaning. And I believe that at this point, in my life when I see somebody being a part of a tribe, whether that be an actual ethnic tribe like the Zulu Kingdom, or a tribe such as your university that you have their merch for and you support them when they go up against other universities at sports games or what have you. I think that's very important, and I think that that is incredibly meaningful, to the point that it's more meaningful than even the individual when it comes to actually giving people a sense of purpose. And I say this because I think I'm an example of what happens when that is absent. I think that that just ends in a lot of bitterness and also a lot of ambiguity in terms of knowing where you stand in the world and in relation to other people, and especially in relation to other people who look like you, but when you're looking at each other, you don't see sort of yourself, you don't see a mirror image of you in them, you don't feel that sense of togetherness, that sense of pride, that sense of sort of knowing something that outsiders don't know, if you get what I mean. For those of you who don't know, when I was a child, I was born to a mother who she didn't want me. I don't think she could have. She was, a drug addict, prostitute, all those sorts of things. And so I obviously was not planned. I wasn't wanted. So I sort of came into the world not being wanted, was immediately abandoned, was immediately put into foster care, was immediately sort of stripped away from my, heritage in a way, from my language and from my cultural influences, which I think very much informs sort of the person that I am today. I'm not entirely sure why actually, but I do feel guilty about it. But whenever I sort of very subconsciously and without much thought walk past the mirror or look in a mirror, I get a bit of a shock because I realize that I'm black. And this may sound absolutely bizarre, I know. When I say it out loud, it sounds incredibly bizarre. But even when I sort of imagine my life and project myself into my future, or even sort of project myself back into the past, looking at memories, the good and the bad, what have you, I always imagine a little white girl or a grown white woman. And I do think that this has a lot to do with how I grew up. I think the most profound thing that has very much influenced this image of myself, which I have in my mind of being a white individual, is to do with the fact that when I was fostered and adopted, and then, due to circumstances, fostered again, I was only raised by white South Africans, is that I only spoke English and Afrikaans. I never spoke my native language. I never learnt or spoke Zulu. And a huge component and part of my life growing up was that whenever I encountered somebody who was black, they would inevitably speak to me in Zulu. And I think this is where I guess I put a bit of blame on myself. Well, definitely I put blame on myself. I didn't even try. I didn't even try to learn the basics of just saying hello, how are you in Zulu, even when I was at an age where it was perfectly easy for me to do so, to just go out, find another little black kid somewhere and say, look, teach me how to say the basics, just so that life can be easier for me and for others, so that I can show respect to other people. I didn't even do that. I definitely had this complex in which I perceived myself to be white. And as a consequence of perceiving myself to be white, why would I learn Zulu? Why would I even try the basics when I speak perfect English and I'm cultivating perfect English, when I speak Afrikaans and enough Afrikaans that I can have a pretty meaningful conversation? And so whenever somebody would come to me, which would happen all the time, especially because I was always the single black person with white people, namely white adults who were raising me and trying to turn me into, you know, the perfect little protege of what a black person potentially could be if they, you know, have the right Christian upbringing. I would always be approached by Zulu people who would come to me and say the typical "Sawubona, unjani," or, you know, something along those lines. And my response would always be, "I'm sorry, I don't speak Zulu."
Oh my God, stop fucking lying.
And this caused a lot of issues. The interactions would either end in them continuing to talk to me in Zulu because obviously I was disrespecting them and I knew that it was disrespectful. It was definitely not the approach that ought to have been taken, but nonetheless, I took that path. Still to this day, it's quite an interesting phenomena that I would, for instance, be, let's say, at a corner store with one of the white women who was raising me at the time, let's say, and I was just with her. And because this was just a sight to behold and just a very odd sight, somebody would come up to me and say something to me in Zulu. And I would say, "I'm sorry, I don't speak Zulu. I only speak English or Afrikaans." And at least as little as 5 minutes later, every single person who was in this environment would know that I didn't speak Zulu and would know that I had been the disrespectful one who had not responded to an elder in Zulu, who had spoken disrespectfully and who only spoke English and who was holding the hand of a white woman. And I mean, obviously, the white woman who I was with wouldn't even acknowledge the existence of the Zulus around. So, you know, she would just go on her merry way. And I think it was inevitably because the dynamic was so strange, in which I would find that the black people, the Zulu people in the situation, in every situation, had such respect for the white person who was my guardian or my adopted parent. Such respect, because there was just this ingrained notion that white people are superior to black people. And, you know, it was just obvious, like, to everyone. But in my mind, I was also white, and I therefore expected the same kind of respect. But obviously, in their eyes, I was a little black girl who was like nothing, right? So that really messed up a lot of the social expectations that we all had. And because my white guardians obviously didn't understand what was going on, because in their eyes, I was like them. I mean, they saw that I was black, but I was theirs, their little thing that they had been raising as a white child. It therefore didn't make sense to them, and they didn't really see it, if that makes sense. I remember so many instances. I remember once I was at a dinner. I was obviously the only black person there and everybody else was white. In South Africa, housekeepers or maids are all black. You'll never see a white maid or a white gardener or garden boy in South Africa. It's very, very much divided on socioeconomic in relation to and equating to racial lines. So I was at this dinner and gosh, I can't believe I'm sharing this. Oh well. Everybody was served food, the first course of a meal. And I realized after everybody had been served their meal and had started eating that I had not been given food. And I think everybody at the table thought, what's happened? It's just, you know, a delay in the kitchen or whatnot. But it very soon became apparent that actually the maid was not going to serve a black child food. And at the time I didn't understand this, but now I do understand this. And she outright refused to make me food until the white head of the table actually really went at her and scolded her for not serving me food. And then with a lot of begrudging anger, she served me food. But it was definitely something that humiliated her incredibly. And at the time, I definitely did not understand that. But now looking back, I do understand how peculiar and how disrespectful that was, of a certain race already being so disrespected just in the general context of having to serve another race in the context of South Africa and apartheid and all that. So it was definitely something that I was always in contact with, that feeling of not being a part of my tribe. And because of that, I really hated my tribe. And the feeling was mutual. At school, I wasn't integrated with the black students. They would realize that I didn't speak Zulu, especially the older students would then have conversations with me in Zulu, knowing that I didn't understand, but would just keep going and keep talking. And they knew that it was making me angry. They knew that it was making me hate them even more. And it really just got to a point where I had absolutely nothing in common and felt that I had nothing in common with my tribe. I had no sort of association. And I think to this day, I still definitely feel that I have no association. But then I look into a mirror and it sort of really stands out to me that, oh, you know, I am Zulu, you know, like I look at my nose, I have a very, very typical Zulu nose, it's quite obvious that I'm Zulu. I think it's very important for people to feel like they're a part of a tribe and part of something in an authentic and genuine way. I can see how important tribes are to people, even if they are sort of very informal or quite new tribes or new kinds of tribes, such as communities on YouTube, such as aesthetics that people follow. It really gives a sense of purpose and direction that I don't think the state of existence which I find myself in is capable of giving in quite the same way, in quite the same depth. The reason why I, for instance, missed my boarding school was because it was the first time in my life where I actually had a place. And it wasn't that I was a part of a tribe, but I was in quite an exceptional situation where I was the person who united two tribes. Let me explain. My boarding school was a very interesting place because it was about 60% black, 40% white. And it was a huge school, huge school. At my school, it was quite evenly divided between the two dominant races. And for the first time, it was very apparent to me that all the whites were with one another and all the blacks were with one another. But inevitably, being in boarding school, for the first time, blacks and white students had to live together and had to live in the same environment and had to somehow come together and relate to one another and make living together bearable and make it work. And I think because there wasn't that adult influence, it made this a lot easier for reconciliations to be made, not having the influence of parents, especially because a lot of parents, well, obviously grew up in apartheid, but also because it meant that we had to think for ourselves. And when there was something wrong, we had to come up with solutions. Because I was black on the outside, I fit in with the black cohort, the 60% black cohort. But I also spoke not just English, but white South African. I knew sort of their vibe, if we could put it in crude terms. And so whenever there was an issue, which there always was, I would sort of be the person, the go-between in a way, and also just quite a unifying force in a weird sort of way. I found that the black students were drawn to me because I was sort of a bit of a curiosity, because I wasn't like them. And they also found themselves, in a way, trying to break from their parents, you know, just being a bit rebellious. We were young teenagers, 12 and 13 years old. So they wanted to defy their parents in a way, and they could because they were at boarding school without their parents. So they didn't speak, you know, traditional proper Zulu, but colloquial Zulu, which had a mixture of English and some Afrikaans. And so I was a lot more appealing to them than I was to their parents. And then also with the white students, I was also, for the majority of them, the first black person who they actually had something meaningful in common with, and the first black person who they actually touched, like hugged and were friends with. And so it was quite an exceptional situation that we all, I think, found ourselves in. And a consequence of that is that I was incredibly popular. And this popularity manifested itself in a very interesting way, not in the same way that you see sort of European and American popularity, which at least on film is stereotypically associated with being the prettiest and, you know, doing, I guess, I don't know. I think it has more to do with sort of like looks and sociability and everybody wanting to be like you. And I didn't find that that was the case. I definitely was not a looker. I wasn't the smartest, but I sort of had a lot of qualities that allowed me to be a good communicator. I was very good at changing for certain situations, very good at being sort of colloquially African, colloquially black for certain people, and then being, you know, a fun, rebellious white South African for some, and then being a very proper white for others, and then being a bit, you know, Afrikaans for some. And it sort of really allowed me to just move very easily. And I also found that it helped that my teachers really liked me, and they really liked me, I think, mainly because I was very different, and a lot of them were white and hadn't really experienced teaching a black student who spoke English like I did, or only spoke English, and it really helped. And so I guess in boarding school, that was the closest that I felt to being a part of a tribe. However, it was odd, and I would say that I didn't actually feel completely as if I was a part of something, because it became very obvious to me on a Friday when all of the predominantly white boarders would go home to their farms and their parents that this wasn't, you know, a real sort of tribe and family. They had other affiliations, more tangible, more concrete tribes and bloodlines to be associated with. I think also a consequence of being the person who was, I would say, the most popular at my school was that I also was very lonely in a weird sort of way. I guess when you're friends with everyone, you're sort of in a way friends with no one. Because there's nobody sort of significant who you can confide in, who you can be friends with exactly, because there's sort of a bit of you in and with everyone. And I remember at our breaks that I would go from group to group, effectively just checking in, and it was more like I was ticking off a list, making sure that I'd gone to every group, checked in with everyone, made sure that this person was okay from yesterday when they'd come to me crying about something, that sort of thing. And so I served a very agony aunt sort of role, which I loved, but on reflection, it was very common for me to actually go from group to group during a lunch break and then find that I could just go off by myself and I wasn't missed, and I also didn't really know where to go. And so that was a weird place to be in as well, but it was definitely a preferable place to be in relative to where I'd been in primary school, and that's for another video. I don't know, I think I'm just thinking of tribes and tribalism a lot more because I see it a lot, especially in Europe, and I think especially with everything that is going on in Ukraine and the vision that Putin and so many Russian leaders before him have had of finding that all-encompassing Russian identity, even if it means destroying the identities of others in order to realize a vision of a greater Russia. I think it's just very present, and it's just very obvious during these times in which everybody, I think, in modern societies is very angry and very much grappling with the conflicting aspects of individualism on the one hand, and being an individual, and also being a part of something bigger, namely a tribe. And some tribes are definitely perceived as more important than others in this day and age, and some are worthy of expression and identity and others are not. And I think this is causing a lot of problems and a lot of contention, especially as more firm and solid boundaries are being drawn between groups in order to reinforce their identity and their existence and authenticity. So it's an interesting time, even if it is a hard and unpleasant one. And I don't think it's necessarily going to go away. But I just thought I would give my little spiel about how I grew up with tribalism and my inability and also unwillingness to integrate or to actually be a part of my native tribe. It's like I've just been put into this illusion of being something which I'm not. But at the same time, when I look in the mirror and I see that something that I'm not, I'm also seeing something that I'm not. So there's just this disjoint, and it can be quite perplexing at times, and I do feel very detached from myself and also from other people. And I think because of that, it is quite difficult, because I sort of look at the people who I'm friends with, and all the people who I'm friends with are very European, or very, at least, influenced by British culture, by British influences, or by Eastern European or Canadian, etc. So it's just a very odd one to sort of navigate, and it's an odd one to sort of, I don't know, to grapple with, to find meaning from. Anyway, I don't know why I shared this exactly. I'd love to read about your experiences of being, I guess, a part of any form of tribe, anything, any group of people, of individuals, of rituals, of routines that has given you a sense of identity, a sense of purpose, or otherwise. Remember, this is all just my opinion and my experience. I'm in no way saying anything about other people. If there's anything that I haven't really clarified, I might make another video on this. But this is not something that I really... I'm a bit indifferent to talking about it, but I think I do realize that for a lot of people this can be something that is not pleasant to hear, and that this is not something that they want to hear, and I do understand that. So I will tread carefully. I've enjoyed talking to you. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Thank you very much to my patrons, and I will see you very soon in the next one.